Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's virtual parlor chat. We're going to begin in just a couple of minutes. We're going to let people get into the webinar and then begin. Well, hopefully we have let some time for people to get into the webinar and we can begin. Good evening. My name is Catherine Hughes. I am the Executive Director for the Morris-Jumel House. I am going to be the host this evening, and during the evening, I will pose some questions to our speaker, and introduce him. We have the opportunity for you to ask questions and give comments as well. So let's begin. Tonight's parlor chat is focusing on creating an audio experience called NORTHUP that focuses on a woman named NORTHUP. We have Kamau Ware with Black Gotham experience speaking with us about the process that he went through to create this experience. So let's see if I can advance here. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can gain control. Well, I do not have it. So let me introduce our technical guru this evening, Meg Lynch. Meg is the Museum Operations Manager at Morris-Jumel. And I am...
Catherine, I'm just going to go ahead and try and steal that screen share from you. And
okay, go right ahead.
Perhaps
it's not going for me, so
let's see what we can do here. How's that looking?
That is great. Thank you very much. So we want to just let people know that this event is being recorded, and it will be on our website, so you can access it anytime. And you can also go on our website to look at past virtual parlor chats. You, as I said, will have an opportunity to be able to ask questions or give any comments that you would like. Next slide, Meg. So we're just pointing out that at the bottom of your screen, if you are new to Zoom, you can go and either go into the chat or Q&A and submit a question or make a comment. And we will see those, and we're going to field those after Kamau's presentation. We encourage you to make a donation today to the Morris-Jumel Mansion. We are doing many virtual parlor chats, outdoor events, community workshops that are free. We want to be able to do that, but we also rely on the support of donors. So if you have the opportunity and feel so moved, please use this information to make a donation. You can text, you can mail a check to us, you can go on our website and donate.
I'll drop that site in the chat as soon as we get started.
Great, thank you. So now let me introduce our speaker, Kamau Ware. He is an award-winning visual artist and storyteller based in New York City. Kamau creates new narratives about the African diaspora's history through photography, film, exhibitions, and events. In 2010, he founded the Black Gotham Experience, which utilizes art and walks to illustrate the impact of the African diaspora in New York City. The Black Gotham Experience has been in the Seaport district of Lower Manhattan since 2017, serving as a gallery and entry point for the BGX walks. In 2022, Kamau Studios opened an additional location in Dumbo for Kamau to expand. He has become widely sought after for his work as an artist and historian, commissioned to create original works by the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, the Apollo Theater, the Mile Long Opera, the Shed, Creative Time, and has new works in process with us, the Morris-Jumel Mansion and Lincoln Center. Kamau has spoken at the New York Historical Society, the Public Theater, Yale University, and the Municipal Archives in Amsterdam. He has developed classes, tours, and workshops for NYU, Columbia University, the New School, and K-12 schools across New York City. His work has been featured in The Atlantic, the New York Times, Atlas Obscura, Hypoallergenic, Curbed, ABC, and NBC. In 2021, Kamau led an initiative to declare July 13th Black Vision Day through proclamations by the Borough of Manhattan and the 27th District of New York State. He has successfully advocated Manhattan's Community Board 2 to pass resolutions to mark land owned by Black people in the mid-17th century, known at the time as Land of the Blacks. Kamau proposed the naming of a new public space, Manuel Plaza, that was inaugurated with a ribbon cutting ceremony on July 15th last year. The name honors 5 men named Manuel that self-emancipated and earned farmland in the 1640s. In 2018, Kamau inaugurated the first walking tour in New York City Hall to focus on Black history. In 2023, a short film adaptation of Epicenter screened in City Hall's Governor's Room and is now available online at the New York Public Design Commission's homepage. I want to welcome Kamau to our evening's virtual parlor chat. I stepped into working with Kamau when he was already well into the project with the Morris-Jumel Mansion, but it has been a real pleasure to be able to work with him on the script that he's created for us for the audio tour. So without further ado, let me turn the screen and the microphone over to Kamau Ware. Thank you, Kamau, for joining us.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for getting through that bio. I think sometimes people take sections out, but I feel like you're like, I want to read the whole thing. So thank you for that.
It was impressive. So I was happy to do it.
Thank you so much. I want to also thank people who are attending today. I see some familiar names. I see my partner. I see BGX members, fellow nerds of history and comics in here. And it has been great to get to know you as well, Catherine. And I greatly appreciate how you have welcomed me into the process and added your own flair as a person who's into theater. And so I really am having fun. And I think that fun and joy is an important part of the process. And I also really want to acknowledge the person who I'm going to speak about today, Ann Northup, who is a really mighty, spirited energy. And she's someone who I got initially introduced to through the film 12 Years a Slave, that I saw on my birthday because I like to see things like slave play and 12 Years a Slave on my birthday. I don't know why. But powerful film, something I have seen once and a half. It's not the kind of film you watch every Christmas or Kwanzaa. It is a very powerful, emotional piece. And I love the protagonist switch between Solomon Northup. You paid more attention to Patsy, which was a great role for Lupita to kick her career off. But like in the background, you have this woman who has 3 children, Elizabeth, Margaret, and Alonzo, who for 12 years is up north while Solomon is in Louisiana. And at the end of the story, you know, they're all there together, but I've always kind of wondered, like, you know, just as a person who has a son who's been in a family, like, what is that woman doing for 12 or so years? And come to find out that she played a very critical role in Solomon being freed. That was not in the film. I feel like, you know, it's not unique. A lot of times Black women's stories take a backseat to the stories of Black men, similar to like queer stories. And I feel like part of what Black Gotham Experience is aiming to do is illustrate the African diaspora, but keep a keen eye out for characters that might even be in the shadow of the shadow, and say we actually need to make sure we're celebrating more people like Ann Northup, who doesn't have a book about her, doesn't have a film about her or a play about her like Solomon. And the one image you really find of her, she's embracing Solomon. And I'm sure she was very happy to see Solomon when he returned home. But I think that she is literally a woman without a face in the archive. And when we were working with Shiloh and having years of discussions about who we wanted to focus on, it was like, you know, we want to focus on Ann Northup and tell the story of this Black woman. And I want to acknowledge the people I've had a chance to work with. We're looking forward to releasing this soon. It has been a labor of love. It has been a lot of personal learning. Energetically, Ann Northup has been someone who seemed to want to almost remain kind of like secretive. And I say that from the standpoint that when you tell stories of people who are not thick in the archive, you kind of have to open up a conversation with them energetically and read about them, but also be open to receiving other forms of inspiration that might come through dreams or walking where they were, or, you know, perhaps it's, you know, a daydream, who knows? But Ann Northup is somebody who I feel like in telling her story, there's been like a little bit of back and forth of like, maybe I don't want to be out there like that. You know what I'm saying? So like, okay, cool. It's so I had to do a rewrite, you know what I'm saying? And I think that you really have to walk into this with integrity and honor and be able to truly be in conversation with the energy of the person who you're speaking with. And so I've had my role as a director and writer and visual artist. Michael Sagaralo, lead researcher, who now is Dr. Sagaralo. I got to add that to his credentials. Copy editor, Troy Zell. She's been great with helping us think about, you know, language and, you know, making sure our tenses match up. Key Williams, one of our colleagues and deep veterans of walks with Black Gotham Experience, wrote the epilogue. Issa Reyes, an amazing musician and singer, is going to be the narrator. And celebrity chef Carla Hall plays the role of Ann Northup in our retelling of her story and making the artifact for her. So she does have a face, so she stepped in to be Ann Northup for us. Asma Amadou, fashion textile designer who made the outfit. And she had her own arc of figuring out more about Ann Northup and Black Gotham to make these clothes. And then the historical consultant, David Fisk, who also presented before with the Morris-Jumel Mansion, was somebody who I spent time with in Saratoga, read his book, and then also did some fact checking with him. Michael, our lead researcher, was really impressed with David's work. And so we wanted to make sure we kept him close to our process. And so shout out to these people, snap, clap, much love. And just want to kind of pause for a second. I like to make sure that my screen, my voice is clear. Just wanted to make sure everybody can hear me okay. I don't see anything in the chat.
We can hear you, we can see you. Everything's great.
Okay, I see a question's already here. Awesome. Cool. We are continuing. Let me move this out of my way. So yeah, so going back to the film, yeah, I am I've made some short documentaries. I've made some music videos. I'm working on a feature-length film now. Cinema is a very powerful medium because, you know, those credit rolls are real. Like a lot of people participate in storytelling with cinema. And I just enjoyed the story of Solomon Northup and his family. And, you know, over here to the right is Ann Northup in the film. And this would be probably Elizabeth and Alonzo. Their ages don't necessarily always kind of like match up with respect to how old they were at the time, but it's okay. It's a movie, right? But we wanted to like do a bit of a mood board. And what you see here in the corner to the right is images from that etching. And I thought about Ann Northup wanting to have her story told in a way that would reflect her relationship with her children, because she spent so much time with them naturally, but also for a time, her role and her position to them is going to ebb and flow. And so I wanted to have this image that represented how her daughter, Margaret and Elizabeth would have seen her. I took this silhouette of her and we thought about like this idea of like narrative being the main thing we're trying to get across as her story. There's hair also over here and women's hands touching. I think part of what that is she's somebody who must have been profoundly grounded to deal with the different types of fear and sorrow, but still outlive a lot of the systems that caused her trauma. And then when it came to the close, we wanted to make sure that we didn't just present her as someone who was always in the kitchen, even though there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think that one of the nuances we wanted to tease out is that, you know, Anne Hampton was born a free woman, and her family also was free, and her father could vote. And this is like early 1800s. And part of the complexity and the nuance we wanted to depict is that she's somebody who was raised to have the clarity of like, you are a free person, you are a Black person, here's how you navigate. But like the 19th century often is given like these very binary scenarios of like a Black person is free or enslaved. But people who were enslaved had a myriad of ways of living, and people who were free had a range of classes and lifestyles. And for people like her that had a family with enough land to be able to vote, she would have been somebody who would have been more like a middle class, free Black person, not quite later on like a rock star like Frederick Douglass, but not somebody who also just left a plantation, was trying to find a way to get sustenance. She kind of had a bit of a step up for a lot of Black people that would have been in a northern or southern state. And so I wanted to tease some of that detail out. And so here is our lovely celebrity chef, Carla Hall. And it's been a, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and tell myself at a point in time when I was working on writing this script, I was kind of feeling like I was hitting a wall, because so much of the artifacts about Solomon Northup is how we get to Ann Northup. There's books about him. He, like I said, he has an autobiography. He's got 2 plays. He's got a movie that won an Oscar. And so if you're trying to get to Ann Northup, you're going to more or less get to her through the contours of Solomon's life and Solomon's eyes. And I was struggling trying to just get her voice more, and I got that pushback from my team, and I appreciate that integrity of purpose to say, these 14 pages is cool, but you got to start over. Is not enough about Anne. She's not centered enough. And there was a moment where we went there for the photo shoot, and Asma Amadou here had completed the dress, went to DC for the fitting with Carla. And then when Carla came out of the basement of the house, the mansion, and she walked toward me and gave me that smile and like bowed to me and gave me a hug, I legit cried. I like legit tears of not just joy for seeing the process, But the awesomeness of the various art forms and space and location coming together, also the healing process of literally unearthing this woman's story in a way that can be visible for others. And that was a helpful way for me to think about her. Actually, we have like different renditions of this dress that sometimes it's good to like even like just like look at and think about her and how she moved through spaces. So shout out to Carla Hall, support her, check her out on all her programs. Asma, you'll see more of her work later. She just got back from a trip. Love her as well. And this is an image of Carla Hall posing in the kitchen where the hearth is, where Ann Northup would have cooked. And the styling down to the locket around her neck was thoughtful. The teardrop earrings representing the idea of like, sadness, but elegance and strength. The fact that her dress has this very clear blocking of color, where the northern part of her dress looks different than the rest of her dress. The materials, pastels, but like earthy with the green, somebody who, cooked and was a farmer. And then, of course, Carla, who loves food and is a chef. And when we talk about Ann Northup being a cook, I think it's important for us to remember that for a Black woman born in the early part of the 19th century, who's going to spend the majority of her adult life watching the country determine what's a slave state or a free state, the fact that her husband was captured and kidnapped and enslaved, her position as a Black woman, even after the Reconstruction Acts were passed, she still couldn't vote. And so she has so many different layers of humanity to prove and demonstrate for people who weren't on her level of humanity. And when you think about her being a cook, she worked at a range of hotels that were top-notch in Saratoga. She worked at hotels that also were outside of Saratoga as well, coffee houses, where she took care of the menu for politicians and judges who worked during the circuit court season of the year in Glen Falls. She's somebody who worked for the most wealthy woman in the country. So she's somebody who would have really been considered a chef, like a celebrity chef of her day. And so the fact that we have a person who is literally a celebrity chef stepping in, that was just a great way to also elevate her persona and elevate her story. And Carla was all in. She took one of her walking tours, and I told her at that walking tour, I was like, you know what? I got a project you might be interested in. And she was like, that big grin popped up. I was like, send me a text. And so I guess the rest is history. I want to read for you the opening part of this. Just kind of once again, some a timeline. I'm
going to interrupt just for a second, Kamau, to tell anyone who does not know this, because a number of people probably do, but that Ann Northup was hired by the owner of the Morris-Jumel Mansion, Eliza Jumel, to come and cook for her in the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So we didn't know this for a very long time in the history of the mansion, and then discovered it. Her voice can be heard because of some later litigation where her children had to testify because they lived there as well. So I realized that some people might not realize that Anne was, somebody that was working in the Morris-Jumel Mansion at one time. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. Sometimes you need a wing person to but what I'm going to read for you now is the opening of the prologue. And I chose to break this up into acts versus chapters because I think that it just like a little more drama to the idea of theater and place, and looking at the Morris-Jumel Mansion as a stage for this woman who is a historic figure and character in this story. And I also think that it's interesting to begin to look at some parody with Ann Northup and Solomon Northup, considering that Solomon Northup has his autobiography, 12 Years a Slave, but then he also published 2 plays. And then the film came out later, posthumously directed and by, an Oscar-winning director. And so I thought that having a play would be a nice use of a container for her. So in the actual audio project, you're going to hear Issa Reyes as the narrator. And so I don't know how many times I'll be reading this. This will be the first time. So I hope you all just kind of can imagine being on the grounds of the Morris-Jumel Mansion in the Washington Heights section of Harlem. And here it goes. In this universe, location matters. In some places, the fact is more acute than others. I actually moved my thing around so I could see. For Black folks, that is especially true in the United States of America. Where and when you are can be a matter of life and death. Where we are situated now, the grounds of the Morris-Jumel Mansion feel serene, a perch of sorts atop a cliff in walking distance of 2 rivers. Listen to the scene. Try to catch the song of a bird. Any given day, you may walk the grounds surrounding the mansion and hear people of different skin tones enjoying each other while appreciating nature. This peaceful environment is the oldest surviving residence on the island of Manhattan in the Washington Heights section of Harlem that was intended to be away from the hustle and bustle. Can you feel the history moving through the gardens? Let's take a walk along paths that bring you in touch with cascading benches, a sundial, a bird bath, and a marker of Kingsbridge Road. From 1769, this home was built in 1765, away from the commercial center of New York City and Lower Manhattan, when such markers were necessary. This white mansion was always made to feel different and is an energetic time capsule between 160th and 167th Street, containing centuries of American lore. Some of these stories are better known than others. And so this is our introduction. And the reason why we want to kind of give people a sense of time and place is because there's been times where you come to the museum and the history of this place that was built in 1765. There are lots of stories of George Washington, and there's a lot of places all over New York State. George Washington had a sandwich here, right? And so you have women's stories like Eliza Jamel, who was the actual madame of the house. And you have people who were of African descent, whether they were enslaved or free, their stories are often even further buried. And so part of what we wanted to do was situate the house as a scene, as a canvas, as a stage, and then begin to think about what Anne's life was like before she arrived and began to work for Eliza Jamel, and then what it was like when she left, because she was there for a particular amount of time, less than 2 years. And she came there with her 3 children. And then she eventually, all of the children were back in Saratoga. And so the story moves you through the mansion and gives you a few different things to consider. Right now, I'm going to get into a bit of a dialogue with Catherine through some questions and answers about the process and the history. But I wanted to show you one more slide before I do that, and just show you that we're also working on other pieces. We got a grant from the Mellon Foundation for this work, and this is an image from 1642-43, and we have this fantastic woman here, Lauda, who's playing the role of this woman, and Asma also created this style and this look as well. And so part of what I'm trying to tease out is that this is a larger process of excavating stories where people are not represented, or representation often is minimal and needs some more development. And so I think about my time to give a bit of an opening, and then I think Catherine has some questions and some things for us to think about. So that might be cool to just stop my screen there and see what questions or thoughts we want to get into. This is like a nerd out right now.
All right. We welcome all nerdy questions. I think one of the things that any history museum right now has to consider is, whose story have we been telling? What have we not understood, not realized? And in the North, especially, I think we have had a very sort of separate view of slavery. We are not part of slavery. It was just the South, you know. We only had it for a little time. It was really the South. They wanted to keep it. We didn't want to keep it. And so having worked on the south of the Mason-Dixon line and north of the Mason-Dixon line in museums, I know that in Atlanta, for example, you know, it's been very difficult to approach the subject of slavery. It's very, very close and very real for people in Atlanta. But here in the North, it is a real challenge to recognize that we have had our own system that has been keeping these stories, you know, untold. And somebody like Anne, as particularly a Black woman, as you said, would not have her story told. It is somebody more famous like her husband, or somebody like Frederick Douglass. I've worked a lot on the story of Frederick Douglass, and it's amazing to me that he wrote 3 autobiographies and he barely mentioned his wife of 44 years, who was the woman who set him up for escape. She provided the means for him to escape from slavery. So, you know, she was an incredible woman, but he gave her very little time in his writing. That's not to say that he didn't love her or whatever, but we didn't hear her story, and her story is amazing. And I know that there's somebody on our parlor chat who is a great grandchild of Anne and Solomon. I think it's Melissa Howell. And so it's thrilling to have you, Melissa, because we didn't recognize the women in people's lives. You were the great-great-grandchild of somebody like Frederick Douglass or Solomon Northup. But wait a minute, what about the women who were also there? And they were dealing with all of those same problems, but they were also dealing with the silence that was expected of them. And so their voices have been so unknown. So it's really gratifying to be able to bring her voice forward through this audio experience. Now, for everyone listening, the audio experience will be available on our website, so people can download it, and then they can come to the museum and they can listen to it as they go around the site. They can go through the park and the museum, listening to that and having a very different experience than somebody would normally going through with our regular self-guided tour. So that's going to be how people will experience Kamau's creation. And I think it is very much like a play where people will, but they're in it because they're really participating in it as the listener walking through the space. They're not just sitting and listening. They're going to be going through that space. So the museum becomes the set for that experience. And so I think it's very much in line with how theater has focused more recently on the immersive experience. This is very much like that. So I invite people to ask any questions or give us any comments. And Melissa, we appreciate having you here. And if you want to share anything about your family lore, what you have understood about Anne, that would be great to hear as well. I'm gonna just give that a second.
Well, one thing I want to add, I know there was some questions that you and I were going to kind of like go back and forth with Catherine. So if people are waiting for questions, you know, I know there's a number of things that we also.
Yeah, we can talk about some of the things that you and I have been discussing.
Yeah, but I think that one thing that is interesting and also challenging is that we talk about, you know, Frederick Douglass's wife and NORTHUP. Both of them were known as people who could not read and write. And
Right.
people say, yes, like these are illiterate people. They didn't leave any records behind. And I think that is something that is part of why you have to open yourself up energetically to be in conversation with people, because their actions are also clear articulations. And so whether you have somebody writing certain things down or not, you can begin to look at the way people are moving and how they're making decisions and can see exactly what's on their mind. Sometimes the pen is in the movement of the body, not necessarily on the page. And I think that considering how, you know, 1841, you know, and was out working, you know, had Elizabeth with her when Solomon got kidnapped. Solomon was a person who actually was looking for employment. And that's not an unknown phenomenon in a Black community where, you know, there's a person who's a man in the house, supposed to be the man of the house, and everybody's supposed to like kind of have this pecking order of it's the man, the woman, then it's the kids, sons, daughters. And I think that one thing that was problematized by Anne Northup's, you know, industriousness and her reputation, her culinary abilities, is that she consistently had work since she was like 16, 17 years old as a chef, as a cook. And it was Solomon who from time to time in their marriage, who was like, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to make money today or like next week. And that's not a bad thing. This is a family. You know, everybody's not going to be at the same level. You love each other, you take care of each other, and you show up best you possibly can. But I think that it is a bit telling that Anne was working the day that he was looking for employment with his fiddle and was lured out of New York City, actually New York State, to go to DC. And so I think that when you look at her actions, whether it's written down or not, you see she's very entrepreneurial and also negotiating with various hotels where she works at, where she's getting compensated financially, but also she's getting a place to stay as well. And so I think that one way that women's stories may also be difficult in this particular century might be women decided that, you know, reading and writing wasn't necessarily the thing that was going to make them free or make them freer. And so you have to look at their actions and get their cadence through contemplation and through humility versus saying, you know, you wrote it down, I know exactly what you're thinking. Maybe you find out what they're thinking by understanding their movements. And when you look at how Anne Northup also showed up 1841, but then was like, you know, out like a little bit like a year later, but then came back and got Margaret and left with Alonzo, they got Elizabeth. I don't think that it's black and white. I think that she initially didn't plan on staying in, you know, Mrs. Jumel's home forever as her cook. I think that she was like, this works for now, but eventually I'm going to be in my own property that I bought myself, and my kids are going to buy property, and we're going to be next to each other. And that's what happened.
Well, we have a good question from Marie Carter that is about research. So what methods of research do you employ to recreate a story of someone like Anne, who I imagine presents a lot of challenges in terms of what is available in traditional archives?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we had as a great starting point is, you know, David Fisk did do a lot of exhaustive research on the family, and there is the film. And once again, like I said, there's essays and articles about Solomon, and Solomon does talk about Anne and how, you know, she's of mixed race, you know, she's African, European, and American indigenous, and she's, you know, beautiful. But then you also begin to understand that there are parts of the story that he's telling that gives you windows into parts that are not there or like not present. And when you look at some of the records that shows you how she went to the state, that in the movie, you might see that somebody shows up to go get Solomon and takes him off the plantation. Why does that person show up and have the authority to go to Louisiana and say, I've got, my papers from the state of New York from the governor, Hunter, is because Ann Northup, who could not read and write, quote unquote, I got my speculation about her capacity. I think she actually probably could if she needed to, but chose to tell people she could not. That might have made her a little more of a powerful figure if she told people that I can't read or write, but then she actually could discern enough literary works. But I think that part of what you see is she galvanized both sides or both political parties at the time, Whigs and Democrats, and was able to get people to sign off and back up her story that she indeed lost her husband, and then also get evidence that indeed her husband was free. And so while Solomon is in Louisiana, risking his life to tell people, send a letter to these people in New York, she's also finding a way to pull together the political will to get the paperwork done, to get the governor's signature, to send somebody to go get Solomon. And so there are, state records, there's county records that are available that can tell you more about the family. But I think that part of what I found, Marie, is that it was not often written that you have to sit with and say, why did she do this? They got married on Christmas. What does that mean? She's somebody who uncharacteristically, without any kind of illness or ailment, passed away 1875, August 8th. It was like, you know what? It's time for lunch. People got ready. She sat down and they wrote down she expired immediately. So that's the record. But it's like, I asked myself, what's her relationship with death, or how does she conceive death? For somebody to say, you know what, I have no known illness. I'm perfectly capable to cook a meal, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to quote unquote expire immediately. And so part of what I ask myself is, what is her mind state? What is her emotional state? And what is her power source to navigate these different dynamics, So that's my response to your question is there's county and state records for a lot of these things. But also the question is why? Why is she doing this? What does it say? And I think that's part of it, the big fun part for me is looking at why people do what they do versus just what the facts are, because sometimes the facts don't give you the picture.
Well, we have another question here from Adrian Sexton. Were there any discoveries or interesting anecdotes in your research that you were unable to put into the virtual tour?
Yeah, it would be great to be able to say, hey, here you go, 5 recipes that we know Ann Northup created that you can go home right now and make. There are recipes that are from the time periods or places where she worked pre or post, but there's nothing that actually bears her hand that says this is an Ann Northup recipe. I would have loved to have discovered that. I'm not saying that it's impossible or it's not in existence somewhere, but similar, my approach is, why would Ann not record her recipes? And I think that was part of her holding on to her intellectual property, telling people, I can't read or write, so I can't write down my recipe. So if you want my cooking, you got to get it from me while I'm here. You can't take that recipe away from me and just make it when I'm not around. I think that was a bit of a business strategy. And she seems like somebody who appreciates a degree of control and intention setting and following through. Somebody who seems to meditate on exactly what it is that she wants. And one thing that I have found when I think about her mental fortitude is she clearly wanted Solomon to give back to her. She clearly wanted her children to not get captured. She clearly wanted to have her own home, her kids have their own home. She's somebody who probably wanted slavery to end, and she probably wanted all the amendments passed, and probably would have loved to have her own right to vote as well. All these things I'm naming at one point in time were like these big things in her life that probably felt like impossible, but they all happened. And so I think she's somebody who had a lot of intention and power and will, and had something that was grounding her that allowed her to navigate a lot of trauma and sorrow and fear, but come out on the other side consistently where exactly she wanted to land. And that's why I'm saying she's a very powerful energy to be in conversation with. And as you realize these things, you kind of almost, like I said, for a moment, I got the feeling like, do you mind if I'm doing this, by the way? Like, I'm over here trying to tell your story, and it seems like you don't want people to know that much about you. Is this cool? And it's just like, I feel like I've gotten that blessing from her, but I've never really been in the situation where I felt like the person I'm studying is like giving me the vibe of like, who told you to do this? You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the kind of woman I get from what I see her decisions being.
So to kind of add a little bit more to the Marie's question and, continue to piggyback on what you just said, some of the information that we got about what the NORTHUP family's experience may have been like came from testimony from the court battle, that the 17-year court battle that occurred after Eliza Jumel died, where both, believe it was Margaret, is that correct? Margaret, who was depositions and was talking about the dynamic that existed between Eliza and Elizabeth, where Eliza was taking the liberty of referring to Elizabeth as her own child. And that's just, there's so much wrapped up in that simple statement that, yes, Eliza had love and concern, but also if Elizabeth was her child, she probably wouldn't be serving her. She would be sitting at the table with her. And then you think about Anne listening to her boss claim her child as her own, and we know that the time period that the NORTHUPs lived at the mansion was relatively brief. It was somewhere between about 2 and 3 years. And I really am relating to what you're saying about Anne just being a woman who knows like what she can tolerate, what she's willing to deal with. And, despite having stable income with Eliza Jumel and being able to keep her family together, my impression of her has always been that she just could not, this was a woman who could bear a lot, but you can't claim my children. And for me, I feel like that was probably a turning point in their relationship. And I would love to find something along, illuminating what her thought process was when she eventually left the mansion.
Yeah, I want to add something to that too. I think that there's a lot to do with the court case that, and without we all know how this ends. We know that certain parts of the story, we know they're going to come to a particular head, right? But part of what I found interesting about the court case is that Margaret, Elizabeth, and Anne all consistently said that Eliza had a child, and they were being at times like almost like coerced to like not say that. And there's another Black woman who also testified who was threatened. And the people who were meant to inherit the property, the Chase family, through her niece, who also has the name Eliza, they were more or less, you see through the testimony, showing up at times trying to tell them like don't say she has a child. Like that's not what we want, because we want to inherit the property. And this idea that somebody else says that they're the child is going to mess up us getting the inheritance. And so I need you Black women to be quiet and say what we say. And they show up in court and say, she had a child. Like that takes a lot of courage to like defy somebody trying to coerce your voice and say, we're going to say what we heard from her. And I find that also very telling that they were navigating white spaces, but not willing to ever just like, put their chin down and not exert themselves as free people who could be bullied. I think that part of the architecture of the mansion also speaks about the fact that it's meant for masters and slaves to live in. And so, 1765, here you are, 1842, and you're navigating a space that's meant to support that relationship. And she pushed back on that time and time again. So once again, it's like, there's not like a diary that we found, but you through like testimony, where she lived, what was bought, what was foreclosed on, then bought back. You begin to like get this picture of a person who has a lot of intention and focus and will, and tends to come out on top with respect to what it is she wants for her and her family.
Well, we have sort of a question and comments in one from Regina Evans. She's saying, I am wondering if you were able to glean anything about her spirit via her cooking methodology. Cooking is such an artistic endeavor, something that you often put your heart and soul into, like poetry, writing, painting, dancing, etc. So I am just wondering if you knew things such as what herbs did she use, or would she have used during that time? What dishes did she love to create? I'm really just wondering if such info gave you any clues into the heart of the woman.
Great question. And I think that there are more people in 2023 who associate themselves as healers and medicine workers than in like 2010. I think that more people have had a chance to like watch more sunsets, run in the grass, try different types of herbal medicines. And when you think about somebody who is a blend of European, American, Indigenous, and African ancestry, who probably was about like my complexion, and you think about somebody like that who knows like not just like what kind of woods to use. Some woods added flavor, managing a hearth, and it was like a big open flame, like that took a degree of like, dialogue with nature. You know what I mean? And if you're somebody who actually like is a medicine person, there's roles that like fire and water play. And most places where she lived, she was always in walking distance to a river, always close to water. So I think about her being close to water and working with wood and knowing how like to season things. This was like slow food and soul food before there was a thing, because she's mixing and fusing different methods, but also she's not going to like a Costco or Instacart to get her ingredients. She got to understand where these things were planted in order to get them and add them. So she's somebody who definitely would have known how to work with herbs, how to work with fire, how to season things, and clearly had enough charm to tell politicians in New York that were not even like necessarily advocates of Black freedom to acknowledge in her memo of sorts to the governor that yes, Solomon was a free person, and we know who Anne is, and I can vouch for her. You know what I'm saying? She's not somebody who's going to lie to you. So if she says this, that's what it is. And for me, the window into, or the contours for Anne Northup that I see is when you understand the land and you understand nature and you feel a connection with that, that can give you a degree of integrity that allows you to withstand a lot of uncertainty and difficulty. I see her being somebody who was consistently grounded, who understand steps, and you look at the way that she maneuvered. She was a chess player and she understood the steps and she understood the outcomes. And so she had more than a recipe for the dishes. She had recipes for how to win and how to, make things work in life. And clearly must have been quite charming. Everybody can't stop talking about how solid her character was and how well people speak about her. And when people needed to vouch for her, they showed up and they did such. So I think that a lot of people who are, cooks or chefs, who are like farm to table, they have a relationship with nature that allows them to be in their best nature, even if the world around them thinks that somehow because you're Black and you're a woman that you're beneath them. I think that she knew that she was a powerful person, and that's how she moved.
Well, we have a few different comments from Melissa, who is a descendant of the Northups. She further substantiates what you said about David Fisk being a great resource. And the family does defer to David, she's saying, as well as Dr. Clifford Brown at Union College, who has apparently done a lot of research and writing. And she was clarifying in particular that it was a slaver relative, Henry B. Northup, Esquire, who facilitated the support of affidavits in order for him to seek Governor Hunt's appointment as agent of the state to rescue grandfather. So just with a lot of knowledge, obviously, about her family. And she is suggesting that we might have on record grocery bills, which give some sense of what Anne may have used in her cooking. And that's an interesting thought. I don't know about that, so we'll have to maybe look into that a little bit and see if we find any grocery bills, if we have those. And she's also saying that there might have been some untranscribed French archives that we have that might offer a little bit more insight into Anne's time there. And that might be because Eliza, of course, was married to a Frenchman, and so we do have some letters in French. I don't know that Eliza wrote any of them, but certainly we can look into that as well. So interesting possibilities.
Yeah, it's awesome to be in dialogue with somebody from the family. So thank you so much, Melissa, for joining and for sharing that. I think something that might be cool for people to know before our time ends. And it was something that was tricky for me, that you have like Henry Northup going to Gilgate, Solomon Northup, like what's the correlation? Do you understand like a generation prior that it was an uncle of Henry Northup that actually enslaved Mentis Northup, Solomon's father, and then like a generation later, they just both grew up free and became friends. And when you look at the places where Henry Northup was and where Anne was working, this is not something I saw substantiated by a record, but it seems like Anne Hampton met Henry Northup in some of the different places where the circuit courts would have met, because he was a lawyer. And I think that it's possible or likely that it was Henry who made the introduction between Solomon and Anne, because Solomon was his friend. Melissa, do you know anything about that from family oral stories?
Well, while we're waiting to see if Melissa says anything, I wanted to just share from Anne Haddad. She said she wanted to thank you for proposing the name of Manuel Plaza. As the historian at the Merchants House Museum, I was fascinated to learn the story of the emancipated Black settlers who farmed the area. This led me to dive into the research, and we will share that story in every way possible. So that's great. Very cool.
Thank you, Anne. We have to, I got to take a walk up to the Merchant House. We got to get a tea or something. Thank you for being present today. I see Melissa's name has been elevated. Did you want to?
Yes, Melissa, can you, are you able to turn your camera on and say hello?
I've asked her to unmute. She may not be at the computer because I'm not getting a response.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. Thank you so much. It is just about 8 o'clock, which is our time. I want to thank you so much, Kamau, for sharing your thoughts and your process. I think it's fascinating to try to, contemplate how we really get at the essence of people from history. It is just such an enormous challenge, and it's such an enormous responsibility for us to think about trying to speak now for someone from the past. And we are indebted to you for the work that you're doing to bring Anne's voice forward. We're very, very excited to be able to do that. So on behalf of the Morris-Jumel Mansion, thank you. We want to thank everybody else for joining us tonight and being part of our discussion about Ann Northup here at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. Please do go to our website, and when you go to the website, you'll be able to see different events that we have, programs, our basic information, but also the Northup experience will be ready and available soon. All right, thank you all very much. Have a lovely evening, and thank you, Meg, for taking care of us and all the technical details for this virtual parlor chat.
I see Shiloh's name over here. Hello, Shiloh. And I also have I put a link in here for the film I worked on that's mentioned in the bio. It's online.
Okay. Super.
Thank you, Morris-Jumel Mansion, for working with us on this very important project. Looking forward to announcing the release date soon.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.